Joining us now on ICANN Media, it's a pleasure to introduce you to Charlie Morecraft. And Charlie, you were here giving a speech, the final speech of the Petroleum Safety Conference, and it was called Remember Charlie.
Correct.
And tell me about it, because it's not as self-explanatory as many of the other titles that we've had here.
No, it's it's not my ego. Mm-hmm. It's not that I want people to remember me. I want them to remember the story. It's the story of an accident that I had while I worked in Exxon. I was burned in a fire and explosion, burned over 45 to 50% of my body. Spent about 5 years in the hospital being put back together again. But it's not so much about the pain that I went through. It's more about what I put my family through. You know, it devastated my family. As I was talking to the people earlier, I was telling them about my daughter, for instance, which is still very, very raw. My daughter died in October, and she would have been 16. She would have been 43 years old, May 16th, and she died. And one of the reasons she died was, she died from pneumonia and bronchitis. However, after my accident, she got involved with drugs and alcohol, and it wreaked havoc on her health. And thank God she hadn't been drinking or drugging for 6 or 7 years. However, as I said, her body couldn't withstand the damage that was done, and she got sick and she died. And I often wonder if I was there when she was younger, because she was 10 years old at the time of the accident. Would she be alive today? I wasn't there. I was in the hospital. I was in the hospital for 5 years. And as many things as I read about it not being my fault, intellectually, I may know that. But in here, I still think if I was there, maybe she'd be alive.
If nothing else, you likely feel you let her down.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I let the rest of my family down. Just because I took shortcuts. My father gave me the will to live in a hospital, walked out the door, had a heart attack right in their parking lot, and died right after that. My marriage went right down the drain, and it was not my ex-wife's fault in any way, shape, or form. It was me. It was me all the way. I pushed everybody away from me.
It's interesting because the way you're describing what happened to your family is often what you hear about happening to addicts' families. People who have done something like that. Yeah. But yours was an accident. It was an industrial accident. Correct. And you got hurt. Part of your presentation here was going into detail on what happened. Yeah. We don't have 45 minutes. Right. I know you were watching the clock while you were in there, but perhaps you can give us an abridged version of what happened to you.
Sure. I was working at Exxon at the time. I went out to do a job that I had done 1,000 times before. It was a job I could have done in my sleep. It was a job that I also knew every shortcut in the books. And I took every shortcut in the books. There was a chemical leak as a result of the shortcuts. I got hit in the face with the chemical, started running for a safety shower. The chemical vapors drifted over, hit the catalytic converter on my truck, which I had left running as against every single regulation there is. Vapors hit the catalytic converter, it blew, and I blew with it. And that, in a nutshell, is what happened. But it could have been prevented. I couldn't see to run when I got hit in the eyes with the chemical. If I had been able to see to run, if I had my safety glasses on, I probably would have outrun the explosion. If I had followed the procedures, it definitely wouldn't have happened. There were so many things that I could have done that day to prevent the accident.
Well, you even mentioned something as simple as you had fire retardant clothing on.
Correct.
Because you'd been asked about that, but you weren't wearing it properly.
Right. I rolled up the sleeves. Hopefully you guys can catch this on YouTube, but I don't know if you can see the difference in the scars. But where the scars end, that's where I had the sleeves of my flame retardant clothing rolled up.
So it did its job.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sure. All the safety equipment does its job. We don't do our jobs. It's you can have every safety regulation in the world, all the equipment in the world, but if you don't wear it or follow the procedures, this is the result. This is what happens.
No, what did happen? It wasn't just your arm that was burnt. That's not your only injury.
I was burned over 45 to 50%. As I was telling the guys in there, guys and gals, I caught the explosion mostly from the left and thank God mainly from the rear. But it shredded my clothing, my flame retardant clothing, so I got burned all on the back wherever it shredded, and on the front wherever I was covered with the chemical because it supported the combustion, and of course my arms and my face were severely burned.
And we're talking third-degree burns here and worse.
Third degree burns, yeah, and worse. Some second degrees, and believe it or not, second degrees hurt a lot worse than third degree burns. A lot worse.
Because there's more left, I guess, to feel it? Or
There's your nerve endings are left and they're exposed, and that's what hurts the most. Yeah.
Tell us about the recovery process and some of the things you had to go through.
I'm not sure you really want to know about all the operations that I had. I mean, a lot of them were really gruesome. I tell some of the stories when I'm in there, when I'm speaking live, but there's so much of it I leave out. And that I've had over 200 people faint on me doing this talk. Never a woman, never a child. It's always the tough guys. And
is this a warning for me right off the bat?
Guys in the coal mines, guys on the offshore rigs, military guys, and I've asked them what happened, and they say, well, all of a sudden they could picture themselves doing the same exact thing and taking the same shortcuts, and next thing they knew, they were laying on the ground, looking up, But the recovery, burn victims have an extremely high incident rate, and you kind of mentioned this before, but. This is not an excuse. Not an excuse. Burn victims have an extremely high incident rate of alcoholism, suicide, divorce, drug addiction. I hit every single one of those things.
This is because of the pain.
Yeah, pain, but I'm not using it as an excuse. People say I drink because. I drink because of my wife. I drink because of the pressures of my job. I drink because of pain. Bull. You drink because you want to drink more than you want to stay sober. And so that's what I did. Mm-hmm. But I went through all of those things. And the emotional problems I went through were a lot worse than the physical pain. I could have dealt with the physical pain. What I couldn't deal with was what I put my family through.
I mean, you did deal with the physical pain, and obviously you're talking about it, but it's easy to see that the family issues are still with you.
Yes, yeah, very, very much so. But... some people are comfortable talking to psychiatrists and therapists. And today I have a therapist that I speak to. But I'm much, much more comfortable in front of an audience and telling them about what I went through.
I'm just going to ask you again, and if I faint, just hold the microphone and just continue talking. Yeah. Just tell us, it's the debriding process that you were talking about. I Googled it because I wasn't quite sure exactly what it was as soon as you mentioned it.
I say it with a Jersey accent.
Yeah, that's
debriding.
That's what I.
It's actually debriding.
That's what I Googled,
right,
and I'm going
right.
debriding. I can't find that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's obviously a helpful procedure.
Right.
But talk to us about what it is and the discomfort that you go through.
Debriding or debriding, is when they have to peel off all of the dead skin when you've been burned. Unfortunately, when they do that, the live skin comes with it, nerve endings come with it, and the pain is excruciating. It's just excruciating. The reason they have to do that is so they have a fresh, clean area to put the skin grafts in. And worse than the debriding, though, is when they finish that, and by the way, you're in a tank of water when they do this. When they finish doing that and they pull you out of the tank, the air hits your skin or where the skin was, and it's just open, and that you just go through the roof, I used to try to time my morphine shots because there were other people in the burn unit when I was in it. It was full. And you'd try to time your morphine shot because, let's see, there'd be 3 people in front of me. I'll come out of the tank when they're through. Maybe if I get the shot now, then it'll kick in when I'm coming out of the tank, so that's how bad it was, that's how bad the pain was.
Well, and I think the thing that will stick with me is not so much the procedure, but you mentioned the screaming that you heard all the time, which I mean makes sense, but that's likely the image that I'm going to have.
Yeah, you never, ever, ever forget the screaming. You just don't forget the screaming from the other patients and my own screaming. As I was saying, I grew up in New York and New Jersey, and I grew up a tough guy. I had wonderful, wonderful parents. Wonderful, wonderful parents. But I was like the Darth Vader of the family. And to think that I would ever scream or cry is something that I would have told you would never, ever happen. I was screaming at the top of my lungs, and there were other people screaming worse than me.
Because nobody can imagine that kind of pain,
Nobody
can
can
they?
imagine that kind of pain, and that's all you do. That's all you do, and all you want to do is just die. Just let me die. Let it end.
When you mentioned that, it resonated with a story I read years ago about a burn victim who said even though he was leading a life that he felt fulfilled and everything was going well for him, he still wished that they had let him die back then because of the pain he had to endure.
Back then, I would have said yes to that. I would have died. I would have welcomed death. I was praying for death. Today, what I used to say was the worst thing in the world that possibly could have happened to me turned out to be the best thing in the world. And I don't mean money or travel or anything like that. I mean the outlook on life. When an accident like this happens, everything in your life changes. All your priorities in life changed. And that's what happened to me. My life just changed drastically, and I hope for the better.
And one of the things that you tried to get through to everybody here is that you are not unique in this. This could happen to anyone.
Exactly. And it always amazes me. A lot of times I speak to kids, be it about drugs or alcohol or texting on a phone. And I always say to them, what makes you think you're so different than other kids? Why is it that you can do it and get away with it and nobody else could? All these other thousands and thousands of kids are dead, but you're different. Why is that? What makes you so different? But people just figure it's not going to happen to me.
And it's not just kids, as you mentioned. It's people
No,
who go to
it's
work
adults.
every day.
It's everybody. It's just not going to happen to me. And it does, constantly,
And as you mentioned as well, it doesn't just have to be in the work environment, because some of the people that you saw while you were in the hospital. Yeah. Tell us about some of those accidents, because I think some people think they're safe in their own home as well.
Yeah, well, the accidents that happen in a home are actually usually worse than the ones that happen on a job, usually much more tragic. I'm going to give you a different example. I didn't speak about this time, but I speak about it in other talks that I do. I was in a railroad speaking, and when I got finished speaking, this guy came up to me, and he said, Charlie, I just wanted to tell you about this. He said, I was at home, and I was out back mowing my lawn, and my 6-year-old daughter was out there with me. When I finished mowing the lawn, I put the lawnmower away in the garage, and I put it next to the hot water heater. Well, a little girl was out there playing, and she climbed up on a lawnmower to reach something that was up on a shelf, stepped on a gasoline line, snapped off, gasoline shot out, hit the pilot light on a hot water heater, and blew. And she was blown across the garage. Luckily, she survived, but she was very, very seriously burned. And sometime after the accident, years later, she came up to her father and she says, Daddy, it wasn't your fault. But somehow he can't have feeling that it was his fault, that he was responsible for his little girl's safety. And you know what? He was right. You don't have the right to do that to your children. It's like guys on motorcycles who don't want to wear the helmet because they want to feel the wind rushing through their hair. Well, when you turn out to be a vegetable because you didn't want to feel, you didn't want to wear that helmet, and your kid's got to feed you and change your diaper, you really have that right? You don't have that right. You don't have that right to do that to your families.
And you're talking about responsibility, and that ties right into what you're saying right now. Take the responsibility for your actions.
Exactly. Take responsibility for your life, for everything you do in life. Stop blaming people. It's your life. Who's always there when things go wrong? You. That's it. Simple as that.
Charlie, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We've been chatting with Charlie Morecraft here on ICANN Media.